Hello, today a problem that is a bit complex, sorry. It's light, it's very nice, but it is a bit complex, a bit complicated. The motto would be do the same causes really have the same effects. And uh, we'll, we'll see how it works. So let's have a look at the jail of the Black King, as usual, and then we'll go further. The square d8 is controlled by the rook c8 and by the rook d6. The square on e8 is controlled by the rook c8 and by the knight c7. The f8 square is a flight, not controlled, not blocked. The square f7 is controlled by the bishop b3 and by the knight e5. f6 is controlled by the rook and blocked by the knight. e6 is controlled by the knight c7, the rook d7 and the bishop b3. And d6 is controlled by the queen, and d7 is controlled by the knight e5 and by the rook. All the white pieces are well occupied, have activity. I will also say that on f8 also the jail is rather closed. The bishop b3 controls then g8. The g7 square is blocked by the rook, and if the king is on f8 he has only one flight on e7. So if we let that flight to organize a mate, we'll have to take care only on e7 and f8. So the same squares we'll have to manage to control when the king is on e7. So you can have a look and try to solve, and I give immediately the solution. So we have one try, very interesting try, and one solution. I begin with the try. The try is queen f4. Queen f4 threatens on f6 mate and gives a flight on d6. If the king goes on d6, it does not parry the flight, and you have queen takes on f6. Also it's a mate because c5 is blocked by the pawn, and d5 is controlled by the bishop and by the knight c7. So how can black defend this threat? If the knight goes anywhere, it opens the line of the queen to f8. So now f8 is no more a flight, and then you'll be able to mate by rook e6. If the king goes to f8, it pins the knight on f6, and now you'll be able to mate on e8. And if the rook goes to f7, that is not only controlling f6 but also closing the line f6 f8, you'll have a mate by knight g6, because from f4 now the queen controls d6, controls back d6, and the knight on g6 controls f8 and e7, and both the rook g7 and the bishop e8, don't control anymore g6. And this try is interesting, as we could see, but on rook goes to g6, you have no mate because the knight cannot go anymore on g6. The bishop is free, was not intercepted by the rook on f7, and then you have no mate by white to the black king. So the solution is the other move that can be done to threaten on f6, and it is queen h6. It threatens on f6. If the king goes, you have the same mate, and now we'll see the same things that we saw before. If the knight goes anywhere, it opens now the queen to d6, and the rook will be able to mate on e8. If the king goes to f8, it pins now the rook because of the line h6 f8, and also the bishop, and then the knight will be able to mate on g6. And if the rook goes to f7, now it opens the line of the queen to f8, and you will have rook e6. And the same, of course, if the rook goes to g6, it will not change. You will have mate on e6 by the rook. So this is the try and the solution. As you could see, it's not so easy to follow all the lines, but what is shown here is quite complicated. Generally you say that the black move causes the mate, so the same black moves should cause the same effect. It means the same mates. And in fact here you have the same mates, but not on the same, it is on the same black moves, but not in the same order. So let's have a look slowly. After queen f4, you had on knight goes rook e6, and when the queen is on h6, on knight goes anywhere, the mate is on e8. Rook takes e8 because the queen is open to d6. When the queen goes to f4, on king goes to f8, you have rook to e8. But when the queen goes to h6, after king f8, you have no more rook takes on e8 because the knight is not pinned, but you have now knight g6. And after queen f4, after rook f7, you have knight g6, and after queen h6, rook f7, you have now rook e6. So it's a kind of magical twist. You find the same mates, not in the same order. It is a very light set of pieces. It's very, very well done and quite complex. And I hope you'll enjoy it. And see you for next problem. Bye.